Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Maya Alanario, and I will be hosting. All lines will be in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. However, we do want to hear from you, so please post your questions early and often in the GoToWebinar question box of the control panel on your right. We'll get to as many questions as possible during the Q&A at the very end of the webinar. We will also have a survey that will appear at the end of the presentation that we highly encourage you all to participate in. It helps us know how we did and what we can do in the future to improve. We're so excited today to have a discussion on SQF training requirements, a comprehensive guide to compliance. I am pleased to introduce today's speakers, Christy Gruzwinski, Technical Director at SQFI, and Laura Dunn-Nelson, VP of Food Safety and Sustainability at Intertech Alchemy. Before I turn it over to them, I would like to tell you a little bit more about both of them. Christy has over 20 years of experience in the food industry with a focus on helping food companies create systems that ensure the safe production of food. Christy specializes in developing innovative and mind-blowing training programs to make complex topics approachable. She also previously served as the Director of Science and Regulatory Relations for the National Restaurant Association's Serve Safe program. Laura joins Alchemy with over 35 years of experience implementing food safety and quality control programs for processing, packaging, food service, and retail operations. She has worked with global retailers and manufacturers in the implementation of their FSI certification programs. Her hands-on experience in food safety management has assisted food companies globally in the successful implementation of good manufacturing practices, quality assurance, and HACCP programs. And with that, I would love to turn it over to Christy and Laura to kick us off today.
Thank you so much. I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you all for being here. A good crowd. Hope y'all have your sandwich and you're ready to dive in. My name is Christy Gruzwinski, and I'm a technical director here at SQFI. I'm absolutely thrilled to be presenting today with my longtime colleague and training partner, Laura Nelson. I'm going to start us off with a quick walkthrough of the SQF code requirements for training, and then I'm going to hand it over to Laura to talk about the implementation of those requirements and how Intertech Alchemy can help fulfill those training code requirements. All right, next slide. And you can keep going. All right, so here's our learning objectives today. What we're going to be talking about, decode those SQF code requirements for employee training. Tell you a little bit about some of those requirements that you might not have thought of. We're going to build a compliant training program for our frontline workforce and our food safety and quality team members, learn how to ensure employee training competency and how we verify those behaviors on the floor. Laura's going to tell us how to do that, and address common training challenges and how to overcome them with some fun, interesting tools. Document your training accurately, effectively, and in audit-ready format. One of our top non-conformances, right? How do you document all of that? So, all right, go ahead. Next slide. Fantastic. Thank you. Let's start out by, like I said, walking you through some of the SQF code training requirements. And of course, we're going to dive right into the system elements 2.9, right? That's the training section. All right, so one of the first things, and I have my code open right here. Let me grab it. My code open right here, hand in hand, ready to go. So we're looking at there's my code all highlighted and ready to go. Does your code look like that? Usually I have a lot more little tabby things so that I can go right to what I want to talk about. So what's the difference between 2.91 and 2.92? I get that question quite a bit. Real fast, 2.9.1 are the training requirements for the food safety staff. Yes, obviously, you know that. But it references the hint here is it references 2.1 2.1.6, way back in your management commitment part of the code, and is essentially a procedure stating food safety staff are to be trained, right? So honestly, your clue to this one goes back to 2.1.1.6, and let's just look at that real fast, which says senior site management shall ensure that training meets the training needs of the site are resourced, implemented, and meet the requirements outlined in 2.9. So essentially what this is your management commitment to training and the resources for training, right? So your time and your money and the people, right? Who's going to do the training? What is my budget? Do I have money? And not only just money, but time. Are you giving your employees, your training folks, your HR, your quality assurance manager, practitioner, are you giving them the time they need to conduct this training? That's all defined there in 291. And then 292, this is your training program. This is the training program itself. This is also a procedure. These are all the details. This is the one that we get, right? So the training program shall be documented and implemented. Who needs to be trained? What do they need to be trained in? How are they going to be trained? And when are they going to be trained? And the most important part is, of course, the competencies. Two things I want to point out here is the training record. So everybody thinks of that register, or what we used to call a register, that log, that training log. Training record shall be maintained and include, says right here in the code, it's the name of the person, what you trained them on, what they should have been trained on, the date it was completed, who did the training, and the last one right there, 2.9.2.3, the very last one, verification that the trainee is competent. This is not a certificate. This is not a sign-off sheet. This is, you taught them, do they now know what they need to do? Are they competent? Can they do what you just trained them to do? The other one that I want to point out here is 2922. 2922. Everyone thinks that this is the translation of these training materials, or most everyone, unless you read it carefully. And honestly, I've had a conversation with my staff, the tech team, Tammy Van Buren, and she's like, no, this is not the translation. This is the food safety training shall be provided in the language understood by the staff. So if you have, let's say, commonly Spanish speaking staff, do the materials need to be translated? You tell me. Can they understand in English if the program's available in English? That's what this says. It doesn't say it has to be translated if the employees can understand the delivery language of the training itself. So if you are delivering it in Spanish, do they can your English speaking folks understand it in that language? So think of that. It's not the spoken language, is what they can understand. So I wanted to point out those two. Do they understand the materials as is presented, and are they competent? We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next in the next slide after that. But go ahead, go to the next slide. Thank you so much. So what in blue blazes is all of this? Lots of text, lots of elements. What this is not all the training requirements are in 2.9 of the code. This was a little eye-opening. I knew that we had training kind of sprinkled throughout, like visitor training, right? So that's in the section on visitors. What training do you do for visitors to your site? But I did not think of this until it was shown to me, until Tammy Van Buren, our compliance manager, showed this to me. There are 16 more training requirements sprinkled throughout the code. And what we're looking, this is insider tip, insider hint, for edition 10, are we going to pull all of these together into one place? You tell us. We're going to put this out for public comment. We're going to have some groups come and talk to us about one of these as a potential changes for edition 10. Should we pull these all together into, say, 2.9, right? as I go through this, you're probably going to agree that all of these should be put together into one place, because honest to goodness, I've been doing this 14 years here at SQF. I did not realize there were 16 other requirements found elsewhere in the code. And here we have in system elements in module 2, and we're just demonstrating module 11. So the requirements for manufacturing. So essentially, many of the details specific to the training requirements for specific roles are found throughout the code. So if you're looking at, and I have these all up here on the screen in the slide, 2, 3, 4, 6. 2542, 2641, 11, and we even into module 11. So this is awfully tiny on my screen, but let's just take a look at some of those that I'm listing off. 2346, 2346, this is folks who do the auditing of your suppliers, your supplier audits. Have they been trained? So that's in 2346. 2542, staff conducting the internal audits. We're used to, we recognize that one. We remember that one in 25. But 2641, training of the crisis management team. And then there were some other good ones. So 11254, the personnel that's responsible for the clean in place equipment, are they properly trained? 11642, personnel trained in the storage and use of chemicals. If they're designated for using chemicals, are they trained? So it goes on. And then there is also in the glossary some additional information about food safety culture and training. All right, go ahead. You can go to the next slide. I think I beat that one to death. So, so you don't find training just in 2.9. You will also find it throughout the code. Go to the picture with the box. There you go. So what I'm talking about here in this slide is the words of wisdom that I will leave with you before I hand it over to Laura. Think outside the training box, AKA the classroom. Let's think outside the classroom in terms of training. Training does not always have to be this designated event where you pull them off the floor. And this is where Alchemy excels. This is why I love partnering with Alchemy. They're out of the training box thinking, so outside of the classroom thinking. In 2.9.1.2, it talks about 2.1.9.2. It says appropriate training shall be provided for personnel carrying out these tasks. And what is this appropriate training? It may not be classroom training. Let's say we're training on how to properly put on your PPE, your hairnet. Does that have to be done in the classroom? No, you walk them over to where the hairnets are and you say, grab a hairnet. Let's practice this. Let's do this. So essentially what 2912 in reference to refresher training is talking about, it needs to be appropriate for the tasks. Is it on the job? Is it formal classroom training? What is it? So think outside that box. Is the training appropriate for the task, appropriate for the personnel, appropriate for the event, if it's refresher or initial training? So things such as job aids, on the job training, reading, just having them read a procedure and confirming that they understand what it is. We've got a new policy here, take a look. And coaching. Coaching is always good. You know what? You walked in and you saw they weren't quite doing that right, so you want to provide some coaching. Anyway, I am going to hand it over to Laura to talk a little bit more about these tools. I know that many of you use the Alchemy training for your staff training. What's great is you have some of that out of the box training, some of that ready to go training, but take a moment to customize that with a slide or two. So this is what, Alchemy put together some fantastic little training, but take a moment to show them exactly where those hairnets are located or where those gloves are located by adding a slide to that. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Laura, and she can provide you with some information about some of the cool tools that they have. Take it away, Laura.
Thanks, Christy. Gosh, I mean, I think if nobody heard anything from me.
You are still muted.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Laura. I think other people can hear you as well.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, I was just going to say that if we didn't hear anything else from me, I think those slides really encapsulating all of the training required for SQF, that's huge, because sometimes we don't take time to kind of gather up all of that information. So fantastic job, Christy. Always an honor to present with you. And I'm going to really approach this from a practical approach on how do we meet those requirements that Christy just provided for us. So let me get started here, and going to, there we go. So Christy talked about defining that training program, right? What is it that needs to be trained, and who needs to be trained? And so that's really where I want to spend a little time on. We've got to decide as an organization, all of those training requirements that Christy laid out there in the code, who in your organization needs that training, right? Sometimes it's not specified. So we need to look at the relevant staff. Sometimes that's our professional teams, like our HACCP team, for example. So is our HACCP team, do we just formalize that into a group? We pulled cross-functional teams together. Maybe they need some more formal training to talk about all the 7 principles, get everybody on the same page. So that might be something you consider. The environmental monitoring team, who is doing the environmental monitoring? And let's make sure that everybody is trained on those appropriate tasks. I was helping a plant. They were getting all kinds of different results in monthly, like spiking one month in environmental monitoring positives, and the next month nothing. And so they needed some help. And so I went in, and the very first thing I did was, let me see you swap. What's your technique? And the first person I observed was doing that 12 by 12 inch square, very meticulously going through and covering it. And then the next person had this real creative Z pattern, right, that they were doing. Well, obviously, you could get different results using those different techniques. And so maybe your team has had some turnover, you've brought some new people over. And so those are the kind of things we need to think about on who needs what training. And then obviously for our complete staff, there's going to be some GMPs training, those people that are monitoring those critical control points. And then as Christy highlighted, there's going to be training that's specific to your organization, above and beyond the required training by SQF. Maybe you have gloves that are used. We probably need some training around glove use. How do you put on gloves? When do you use gloves? What happens when, what would require you to change those gloves? Maybe you've touched something specifically like a trash can rim, and then we need to change gloves before we start back on the conveyor belt. So we have specific training, and so all of that needs to be part of your training plan. So if we go to our next slide, once we understand who's going to get training, we got to start talking about content. And we love our SQF practitioners. I'm thinking many of you are practitioners and out there. So let me just give all of you a shout out. You're doing a fabulous job, just really great work. And I think as it relates to practitioners, many of you bring years and years of experience in food safety management and risk management in the food industry. So you've got this, right? But there are some people maybe that needs specific training around different skill sets or different programs. And SQF has invested a lot of time and with experts to create this curated training for practitioners. This might be great training for your backup practitioners, for example. So you can see some of the topics here. Food safety culture, relatively new in the code. Approved supplier program. Wow. So if you're scratching your head and thinking, well, I understand what a supplier program is, but I don't know if it's robust enough. Well, here's a great course you could take specifically around, from SQF's perspective, what an approved supplier program would look like. So all of these courses are available on zozelearning.com. You can take them at your leisure, purchase whichever ones are appropriate for you and your team. If we go to our next slide, so that's content for practitioners. Here's one for risk management. So, wow, identifying those hazards and risk and doing those risk assessments. It's maybe a cliche, but we're in a very dynamic period of time where there is so much coming at us, so many different changes. You know, our supply chain still got some challenges, geopolitical issues. We're reformulating oftentimes, we're selecting different backup suppliers. What are those inherent risks? What are those risks that's happening? We've got food fraud. Fraud has never been higher, I've heard. So we've got to address all of those things in a way that makes sense to really specify the specific needs as it evolves and the new hazards that we're faced with. So here's a great list of courses. Again, SQF spent time and effort to curate these courses, and we host those on zozelearning.com. Check them out if you're interested. So that's for the practitioner. We've got training that we need just for those frontline folks too, right? So one thing we've learned over the course of our 20+ years is we need to make sure it's engaging. So some of the tips of the trade I can share with you is we really rely on graphics, lots and lots of graphics, limited wording, lots of graphics. These courses need to be somewhere probably at an 8th or 9th grade level. It needs to be very simple information. Some of this information can get, you know, if you ask me as a microbiologist, you know, to talk about, you know, bacteria contamination and pathogen transfer, I can go into the weeds on that. But for our frontline folks, we need it at a level that they can easily understand. These courses probably need to be shorter. We're bringing these folks in. They've been standing all day in a hot environment or a cold environment, and we're bringing them into an ambient training room. What's the first thing they're going to do? They're just going to settle down and just zone out, right? So we need them to stay engaged, and in engaging, Christy mentioned putting your own images in there, hugely important to do that. The data shows that we get a much better engaged employee who has that knowledge, right? So this is just some of the examples of the courses that Alchemy offers, and you can see they support the SQF code. And again, it's up to you to choose which of this content. Now, as a training partner, we really work hard to keep this material current, for example, and I think that's important. As regulations change, we have to update those. A couple years ago, they added sesame to as an allergen. We were way ahead of the curve to make sure that we got the allergen courses updated to reflect that change coming, so that and then constantly think about updating. We update our courses periodically to make sure we still keep folks engaged. So we also, once we've identified who needs the training and we've created content, or we have the content and we've delivered it, we need credit for it. So that's where Christy talked about that list of training records that we need to capture. And I can tell you, this is a particular challenge. Here's the list, and we're going to really talk about that verification. Christy, you mentioned that several times, that the trainee is competent to complete the required task. absolutely we need to do that. And honestly, that can be a miss that some people miss, documenting that. But if we look at just the challenge of paper, now many people, we did a global frontline training survey, our 8th training survey. We just completed it in January. Had over 3,000 professionals respond in the survey. We asked a question about digitization of their training records. About 30% have invested in that. Still got about 70% that are still working on a paper-based or some partial paper-based. And man, that is just challenging. I remember as an auditor, I would identify maybe 3 people that I wanted their last food safety training records. And gosh, it was oftentimes the last documentation I would get at the end of the day, because it just took so long to find, go through all those stacks and stacks of paper, right? So if you are working on a paper-based, think about ways to organize that. And I had people say, oh, Laura, I can't get to the file cabinet, it's locked, the person's on vacation. Yeah, you've got to make sure all these records are available. Think about how you can organize them. Maybe it's by training subject, maybe it's by date of training, maybe it's food safety is in one spot and workplace safety is in another. Maybe it's alphabetical. You got to find a way that works for you, but gosh, I know it's a big challenge. Our system, we digitize, we automate all of the training. So we have a digital sign-in, we hand a person a remote and they click, and so everything they do from that point forward is recognized electronically. So we have an approach where we train and test, and train and test, and all their answers on the testing is automatically captured electronically and uploaded into the learning management system. We've got a really cool remediation loop. We have a patent on it that if anybody in the room gets anything, the answer wrong, it automatically goes back and says, let's take another quick look at that. And it'll retest and retrain and retest. We're wanting to get everybody up to a level of compliance. Gosh, it's so expensive pulling people off the production floor and into that training classroom. So it's important to, while we have them there, that we maximize that time. And so that's one of the ways we do it. We allow a facilitator to see real time how people are responding and the answers. And if they see people missing it, they can stop and really have an engaged discussion on, hey, it looks like we're struggling on that. Let's talk about that. So lots of tools to facilitate that training. And again, all those records are uploaded. So if we look at, let's see here. Whoop, a little impatient. So the training requirements, Chrissy talked about refresher training, and the question I often get is, well, so when do we do the refresher training? When you need it, right? So it's you identify, what we're trying to do is keep food safety top of mind, and refresher training is just one tool to do that, right? So some of the ways you would identify when to apply refresher training would be, how did people answer those questions? Do we have some most missed questions in a particular topic that people seem to struggle a bit with, right? So that would indicate maybe we need to refresh folks on after a 90-day cycle or something. If we start to see some non-compliant behaviors out there in a particular area, GMPs, supervisors are saying, I just can't get people to comply with the hairnet policy or whatever, that would indicate perhaps a need for that refresher training. So there's lots of reasons why we would deploy that refresher training periodically through the year, and maybe not just annually. So you have to decide your program. That's part of your program. We offer 11 food safety refreshers, very short, sweet, to the point. But again, it gives you that, what I call that rolling thunder on food safety, where we elevate food safety up to a level that kind of helps to offset all of the production focus, right? And refreshers, as Christy mentioned, is not the only thing we can do. So we offer food safety culture posters, again, that reinforce those key food safety topics, digital signage in your break room or wherever in common areas, just rolling through food safety and focused on food safety. And then we have pre-built coaching we're going to talk about in just a moment. To again reinforce, what are some other things that you could do, right? So you could do pre-shift huddles. As we come together, let's talk about reinforce. We just gave that course, right? Let's talk about it. Town halls. So when you bring people together, you could include, let's definitely talk about food safety. You need a communication plan on food safety. And that's really how you engender this strong food safety culture, a mature food safety culture. It's, it's really, I think, critical to, again, keep food safety top of mind and let people know how critical their role is in food safety. So, let me see here. Oh, there we go. So Christy mentioned this about the languages. I think that's important as we start to kind of uncover why people may not be understanding the course. Maybe it's the content's too dense. Maybe there's too much material. Maybe we trained everybody on a Saturday and they just don't remember everything. But it could be that they didn't understand it because it wasn't in their native language. Let's face it, that some of the topics we're talking about, like bacteria, preventing pathogens to get into our product that we can't see. I mean, some of these concepts, we get people coming into our industry that has no familiarity with food production. And so it's really important to be able to share those concepts in a way that they understand. At Alchemy, we offer courses in English, Spanish, and Canadian French. We also have courses in Vietnamese, Somali, and Burmese. All of our courses can be translated in over 80 different languages. And so why is that? Well, we recognized it early on that we do have a very diverse culture. In addition to having like 5 different generations working in our plant, we often have multiple cultures. We have customers with over 15 plus different languages or dialects even spoke in the plant. And so when they do some root cause analysis why people are not following the programs, it's because they didn't understand English. They didn't understand it. And so yeah, it's really important to kind of get at that. And that's part of our job, to uncover that and to ask those kinds of questions.
I think too, again, Laura, you're talking about such dense content and a language barrier. It can be a little overwhelming, which is why it's great to have so many of these little tools, to reinforce some of these topics and the coaching and so on and so forth. Because honestly, if you remember way back to when we first started in food safety, I remember Laura and I took HACCP together for the first time when it was brand new, and it took me a while to understand HACCP because a lot of these things are a little dense, but thankfully we have a lot of different tools that we can use to help them out.
Absolutely, Christy, that's such a great point. And again, I think our tendency, we think, okay, we're going to pull them in and we're just going to do a mind dump on everything, right? And we just tend to just make it too long, at too high a level, and just expect too much. So we do have to do that rolling thunder of food safety just a couple of different ways, right, to get that knowledge transfer. So training challenges, global frontline training survey, as I mentioned, we completed that in January, our 8th one. Thank you to SQF for being one of our survey partners, hugely helpful. We had that, again, over 3,000 respondents globally on food safety professionals. And we ask this question every year. Despite our training efforts, we still have employees not following established protocols on the floor. Every year we have a majority of people saying, yes, that's the case. This year, unfortunately, we had a spike. It's up to 73% of people saying, yeah, we spend all this time and all this money and effort, and yet we still have people not doing the right thing, right? They're not exhibiting the behaviors we want. So I'd like to just take a quick pause here and ask you, how would you answer this question, right? Honestly, do you have, in your operation, are you having the successes you want from your training program? And I would suggest that one thing, if you've got a training program that's been static year over year, it's probably an indication that you need to take a look at your training effectiveness. If you're having non-compliances, let's do something about them. I think we can do better here. And let's face it, we're not training just for grins and giggles, right? Hey, we're down. Let's do some fun training. Well, no, this training is required. It's important, and it's like the must-haves. We don't have time to do extraneous training, and so if they're not getting our training, then we have potential risk in our organization of them not following our procedures. And gosh, it's just so critical. Now, I will say on the flip side of this, we asked our employees are highly motivated to do their job well. 70%, Christy, said, yeah, absolutely. We've got motivated employees. They want to do the job well. And so we've got a dichotomy out there a little bit.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. So they're so motivated, they want to do a good job, but they're not. What's the barrier there? Like, to me, I'm just sitting here thinking, why is that? What is the issue? It would be great to see, some thoughts and ideas like from the folks here. Like, why is that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, we actually asked the question.
Oh, but wait, there's more. You've got great.
We asked that very question, Christy. So why do employees not follow your training program consistently? And so, gosh, here's several examples. A little hard to read. You will get this deck, by the way, but let's talk about a couple of these, because I think that's where we start to look at that effectiveness of our training. We've got to step back and say, okay, yes, I trained this, I got the check mark, I got the audit requirements, but is it achieving what we're wanting to achieve? Do we have those behaviors we're expecting? And so number one answer, employees prefer to do things the old way, the bad habits. Okay?
Don't we all? I know I should not be eating those cookies, but I eat them anyway.
Yeah. The speed limit is 65, but heck, I'm running a tad late, so why follow that rule? Yes, we all do it, right? And so we've got to think about, okay, beyond that, if that might be the issue in your plant, then why? So we have to ask ourselves, and I know in working with some folks, one of the things we rely on in the industry a lot is this peer-to-peer training. We'll do the formal training in a classroom, and then for the refinements, we'll say, okay, go stand by Christy and she'll tell you how things work. Well, Christy is savvy and knows all the ropes, and she may explain, okay, look, push comes to shove, we get behind, you don't need to do those metal checks every hour, even though it says every hour. It's okay to do it like whenever you catch up at the end of the day or maybe at noon. That's okay. And then just fill in that form, no problem, right? Or same thing with your temperatures. Yes, you're taking temperatures, a critical control step. You have to turn in this paperwork, but you know what? You know, if we get behind on pulling some non-compliant product off the conveyor belt, just fill it in. You know what the temperature should be, and turn that in, and that nobody will say anything, right? And I've seen all of that happen. Christy, the key, and not that you would do any of that, but that's how we start getting bad behaviors, you know, started sifting through our organization, despite teaching them how to do metal detection checks or, you know, temperature checks, critical things in our plant. What we find is there are some shortcuts, you know, given time concerns or new people or somebody got pulled off of a line, somebody else got shoved into that position. I mean, things happen. So this peer-to-peer training could be one of those ways where we're passing on these bad habits.
Yeah, yeah, and as you see, your third little reason there is there's no penalties for that. So I mean, you know, you're taking the temperature, but maybe not all the time. You know, so there truly is no severe consequence. You're doing it, but not perfectly. So.
Right.
Yeah, I can see it happening. You know, this really shows some it's a reflection of us as say trainers, or us as training professionals, saying, you know, maybe you know, the penalties aren't that severe, you know, or maybe if we go down to a quarter of the people say that the supervisors are not exhibiting the right behaviors. Maybe it's just literally a reflection on us. So if they're, you know, my boss isn't doing it, why in blue voices am I not, you know, doing it?
Exactly. That's the thing. Are they walking the walk, right? You know, is senior management not wearing a hairnet as they're strolling through the plant? You know, everybody, well, it's optional, I guess, you know, and yeah, lots of data to say that employee will support what their manager is doing, what their supervisor is doing, and maybe even they're saying, you know, you know, we're busy, just do the best you can or whatever. That's part of that reflection of making sure we're giving the senior management is giving our employees time to do their job. In both of those cases, on the magnets and the, you know, checks and the temperatures, the company didn't even know that those shortcuts were happening until me as an auditor was sitting here. So shame on them, right, for waiting until an annual auditor appears to call out those challenges. We really need to be observing those people and validating that they're doing it appropriately. And speaking of validating, so here's Chrissy, our favorite, verification. Yeah, that those employees are taking that knowledge that they learned in that classroom or with the peer or wherever, and they're applying it consistently. So this is really a great way to check the effectiveness of our training. And now quizzes are needed. People use quizzes all the time to validate after the training. Yeah, I got the concept. But it's
nothing wrong with a quiz. Nothing wrong with a quiz. It's a great check that they learned it right then and there. But
yes, in the moment. That's right, Christy. But it's the applied learning and that consistency in that applied learning. And that's, if we start to do that, and it's not because you know, we just needed a new code element. The reason we need to do that is because oftentimes we can train people, but they don't apply that knowledge. And for whatever, a myriad of reasons, we just saw a chart full of reasons or you know, issues that erupt because they're not doing that. So those observations are critical. Now, as no surprise for everybody, we automate that. We have an app that does that for you. And we have pre-built behavior validations, and you can literally assign these to a supervisor. They go out, they find an employee, and they start executing on observing, for example, hand washing. Are they doing the 5 steps of hand washing? And that's where you start to uncover, for example, someone who's not using soap. Oh, I see you're not using soap. Well, that soap breaks my hands out. I can't use it, you know.
Or not using the paper towels, right? Everybody
Yeah.
likes to wipe their
Yeah,
hands. Yeah.
wipe their hands or whatever. So lots and lots you can uncover on why they're not doing something. Another situation was they're not using soap because the soap dispenser has been empty for 4 days. All these things and it's that way where you start shoring up at what's causing people not to follow those behaviors we've trained them on. The cool thing about our observations, it's got a built-in corrective action. So literally it coaches those supervisors just line by line, what to ask for, what are you supposed to be seeing, and then if you're not, show them how it's done, ask them to show you again, and then sign off. There's something interesting, Christy, about that signature from the supervisor and from that employee, that personal commitment. We get lots of feedback that how compelling that is. And
very powerful.
And we also, here's a great way to, we always talk about the negatives, they didn't do something, but this is a great way to recognize those employees that are doing things the right way.
I was just thinking that, you know, and let's flip that. Let's not catch people doing things wrong. Let's catch them doing it right. You know, of course, I'm just sitting here thinking, why would people not want to do what they were just training? Sometimes you're thinking, I don't want to be the one who, you know, like the teacher's pet who does it the way, you know, like, but why am I going to be the one who does it? Nobody else is doing it. Why should I do it that way? But catch them doing it right. And this is a perfect tool for that.
Exactly. And recognition, lots of data to indicate that recognition and reinforcement of compliant behaviors drives more compliant behaviors. We actually did a little research on when we were putting this coach app together. And after 3 observations, the compliance went from something like 60% compliant all the way up to 99% compliant. People got used to, oh, they're going to watch me do it. I need to do the right thing, right?
Do it right. Yeah, exactly. And then you also have, in one of your other studies, is that forgetting curve. Over time, people forget. So, you know, just these instances, you know, helps remind, oh yeah. And it reinforces the fact that, yes, this is the behavior that we want to see. You're going to be the one, everyone else is going to be the odd man out. You're going to be the one doing it right, demonstrating the correct.
Absolutely. So, so for those of you who need to do it paper-based, so create your observation template. Make sure your supervisors know what this new expectation is. Either way, you have to set them up for success. And then maybe just identify, hey, supervisors, let's pick 3 employees. I need you to observe them. We're going to do hand washing this week, or we're going to do whatever, PPE compliance, hairnet compliance, whatever. And then they complete it, turn the paperwork in, and then you get that as part of your documentation. So there's, you know, there's definitely ways to execute on this. That's just one example. You'll find what works best for your organization. But I guess the power of this observation, you really do uncover, you could uncover the fact that maybe the language wasn't understood, or it was too complex, or again, that training marathon on Saturday didn't achieve what we wanted to achieve. They forgot some of the key elements, right? So anyway, very, very important part of the code. Just a real quick.
That is my favorite tool. That is my favorite tool because it just hits on so many of the non-conformances that we see and so many of these code elements. Are you doing the right training? Have you verified the competency? Have you done, you know, refresher training? It's identified where refresher training is, like everything about that is just exactly what.
It's like shining a light on it. Yes, exactly. So just real quick, I've mentioned most of this. We have well over 100 plus courses, food safety and workplace safety. Chrissy, you mentioned customizing. All of these can be customized. Pluck out some of those more generic slides, graphics, and put your own graphics in. I love the idea of putting where your hairnet and all of that, you know, PPEs, how that process
So
looks. Take a little
powerful.
video.
So powerful. They go to a training class like, oh, I'm in a training class. And I'm just looking at this photo right here. They sit down and how powerful would it be for them to see their own plant and their own coworkers? How powerful would that be?
Yes, and people that do that and spend the time to do that customization, they have better engaged employees, and those employees are more likely to identify the risk in a plant. Think about the power of just magnifying your QA team. Get people up to a level.
Demonstrating the right behaviors or even demonstrating the wrong behaviors. I know that you do that often in quite the comical way. And it's just like, that is so powerful. So one of the examples that Tammy gave me is in that hair net training. They picked in their plant the one employee with the most luscious and luxurious hair. And it was a gentleman with this gorgeous hair. And how powerful is that right there? And you know, recording that video or taking that slide of that person with that beautiful hair, putting that hairnet on wrong, putting it on right, and using that as an example. Ownership, yeah, exactly. It's perfect.
Fantastic, yeah, and engaging, right? So user-friendly LMS, we can train in a number of different ways, different deliveries, group-based, very powerful in some cases, e-learning on the floor. Couple clicks and you know, you can pull up Laura's training records and how I answered on all the quiz questions, etc. And again, it can be completely customized for your own courses. Well, Christy, we could go on and on, but I'm going to turn it over to Maya because I want to get at some questions here.
Yes. Let's hear some of the questions that you have.
Awesome. I want to say a big thank you to both Laura and Christy for their presentation today. It was fantastic and super insightful. And as they said, we're ready to answer some of the questions that all of you have asked in the question box. We will do our best to get to as many as we can before the webinar is over. If you have a last minute question, please feel free to type it while I'm pulling them up. So, yes.
I have my code ready. Ask away.
Perfect. Let's see here.
I think one of the questions that I get a lot is we talk about thinking outside the box, the classroom, and it's easy to use, you know, some of these tools. It documents it right away. It's easy when you give someone an online course. It's so easy because it records that, you know, documents that right off the bat. But you know, like when you do those on-the-job events and you don't have a fancy coaching tool, how do you document those? That's one of the questions that I do get a lot. But it's being intentional and catching people right, you know, doing something right, you know, so making that intentional and making that part of, I hate to say it, making it part of your job. And I'm talking to you as the practitioner or the plant manager or the quality assurance person or the HR person, you know, making it intentional, even though it seems off the cuff that you're catching them doing things right. You know, maybe that's what you're doing today. You know, you're going to find 3 people doing something right. And then, so now you've planned for it, and so now you'll remember to document that. And that just goes into your LMS, your register, whether it's a piece of paper. It doesn't always have to be something fancy. So,
that's right.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was agreeing with you. I think there are ways companies are doing this, right? And so the documentation, it can be challenging. But again, having a program that spells out the procedures that you're going to do that. We're not sneaking up on these things. Like,
No.
oh no,
Yeah,
I need to
it's
do a couple of
intentional.
verifications. No, that's part of our program.
Yeah.
And we've built in and how we're going to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just part of the process, and having these great tools is very nice to have. Do we have any questions coming in?
Yes, we got one.
Sweet. Let's hear
Yeah,
it.
we got one specifically for Laura. They asked, would you be able to elaborate more on doing alchemy trainings in 2 different languages? Do you have any success stories you can share?
Oh, let's hear this.
Oh, that's good. So I didn't cover off on that. The great question though, we can offer training in 2 different languages. So we have subtitles that are available. And so a lot of people, you know, they don't want to necessarily exclude folks from a training, so they want to bring folks in. And so we can offer training in 2 different languages, one spoken and one subtitled. And that's really effective, right? So we're still getting the knowledge. They still are able to get, you know, that whole train, talk about people, and then the test, get everybody engaged, answering those questions, and then train and test. So they still participate, and it's also very much more efficient that way.
I love that. I do. I love that. And then, you know, if you are doing it as a classroom or a group training, you have everybody together, and they may not be particularly strong in one language or the other. At least then, you know, they can pick up some of it in one language, some of it in the other, and perhaps it all comes together. And they're there with their peers. They're there with their coworkers. They're not being excluded, you know, or having to have 2 separate training. You're all together. You know, they
Right.
work together. Yeah, let's train them all together. I love that. I really do.
Yep.
Awesome. This is a question for both of you. Do you have any best practices for training competency?
So maybe I don't understand the question. So what you're doing is you're identifying the task and what specifically that person needs to do to achieve that task. It's literally step number 1, you know, grab the box of gloves. Step number 2, you know, so then that is the competency. So you're identifying all those tasks, the tasks and all the steps within the task, and then you know, you're identifying what training is best for that. If it's hand washing, watching a video, yeah, great, but you're going to get them out on the floor in front of a hand wash sink and have them do that. Practice. That's something they need to practice. So that's what we're referring to when we're saying you identify the competency and then you verify that they are competent. So maybe, Laura, you understood that differently?
No, I think that's probably one of the biggest tasks we have is figuring out what our key individuals or our staff, our employees, what do they need to know to do their job and to execute and maintain that food safety, you know, management team, right? The management program. And so we're trying to implement the code and maintain the code. So what are those tasks that each individual needs? And it's going to vary. I think the days of just having this rubber stamp one and done training across the whole organization, that's gone. We've got to, for one thing, adult learners, I don't want to be in a room and try to learn what maintenance requirements are, right? I'm not a maintenance person, so I'm not going to pay attention. And so the next course that I get, I may not pay attention to because I've zoned out. So we've got to be very specific on what training they need to do their task.
Yeah.
And so down to the team, we talked about the HACCP team or the environmental monitoring team, crisis management team, or to the person, maybe the person that's an active step for food defense or an active critical control point. They're managing that. We've got to give training specifically for those folks. And
That's so characteristic of adult learners. If you want to get into the theory, think of yourself. If you're stuck in a webinar that's talking about something, or in a training class that's covering stuff that isn't relative to you, you're like, oh, get me out of here. Why aren't they doing? I paid all this money. You know, that is so characteristic of adult learners. Is they want that information that they need, and they want it now. it looks like we're getting very close to our time. The one thing I did want to mention is maybe perhaps they're talking about levels of competency. You know, they can do it with someone coaching them. They can do it with their supervisor nearby as another level. They could do it on their own, or then their competency level, I should go this way, is now they can train others. So maybe perhaps that's what they're talking about. And so they're different levels of competency.
Awesome. As Christy said, that is all the time we have for your questions. I apologize if we did not get to your question today, but please ask them in the survey that will pop up on your screen once you exit out of the webinar, and we will follow up with answers to your questions. Thank you so much again to both Laura and Christy for their expertise, and we thank you for your attendance today. We'll see you next time.